First Nations of Australia, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, and note that sovereignty has never been ceded, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And just before I finish, I just want to say we put on these events regularly, these kind of events where we bring speakers together to talk about issues of contemporary religion and of contemporary things related to Australia. So please support us if you like what we do. And we're particularly pleased to present this event because the guest speaker today used to be part of our executive. So it gives us even greater pleasure to present him today. Let me pass on to Philip, who will continue the proceedings.
Thank you very much. For all of us, the topicality of the referendum for a yes vote is critical, and I can't think of a better ambassador to promote the voice than the Reverend Canon Glenn Loughrey, who is probably my favourite Aboriginal reverend. And he's also an amazing artist, and if you go to St Paul's in the city, in the entrance you will see some beautiful, amazing works of art that Glenn has done. Some of them are actually within a glass, have been turned into a work of art in glass. Really amazing and really worth just that as a trip to the city. As I said, Glenn comes from an Aboriginal background. He's been the Anglican priest in Glen Iris, and at the moment he is one of the Anglican ambassadors to promote the yes vote. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Glenn, and we'll probably have enough time at the end for questions.
We will.
We will.
Darabalinya Badu Wiradjuri, Yawa Nadi Glen Loughrey, Gawambana, Yaradu Marang. What I just said in my language is, I'm proud to be Wiradjuri. My name is Glen Loughrey. Gawambana is the same as the word that you would use here in Melbourne, Wominjeka, which means welcome, and Yaradu Marang means g'day. G'day, even we're Australian, eh? G'day. And thank you for having me here tonight. I attach my acknowledgement to the one given by Alex, which I thank him for and appreciate. And I acknowledge that I, as a visiting Aboriginal person, visiting Wiradjuri person on this country, benefit from what has gone before and the elders who have cared for and continue to care for this sovereign country. So tonight my task is to spend some time unpacking the statement from the heart and the voice. What I want to say is that we often get caught up in the world in detail, in those small little bits that seem to overcome the whole. And one of the issues we have with the voice is it is spoken about in terms of being a separate idea. That somehow it is separate from treaty, somehow it's separate from truth, somehow it's separate from Makarrata, and if we do voice, we'll solve everything within our country's relationship with First People. That isn't the story, and that is not what the statement from the heart's about. And the statement from the heart is a bit like one of those very iconic books that everybody says they've read, but in reality most people haven't. They've only heard what other people have said about it and then parroted back. Statement of the heart is that. Often people haven't read it, or they might have read it once. They might have heard somebody read it, but they haven't read it, and they don't read it, and we don't continue to read it. So tonight, before we start, I'd like you to turn off your rational mind, put away your presuppositions and the things you think you know. A fellow called Howes was an American lecturer who used to say to his students when they first came into the classroom in the first year, "You think you have minds to make up, but you don't have minds to make up until I teach you. Then you have minds to make up." And one of the things about the statement from the heart and voice, many people have opinions, but many people, those very same people, are only having opinions on what they think it's about and not what it is actually about. And in Aboriginal pedagogy, you have to sit with something a long time to find out and allow it to unpack the 37 different stories or whatever else is there in that document for you to understand it. So the statement from the heart, and I'm going to read it. You might want to close your eyes. Don't go to sleep. If you start to snore, I'll speak louder. And I'm going to read the statement from the heart. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent lands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from the time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual nation. The ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto and must one day return thither to be reunited with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We're not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and to take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967 we were counted, 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in the movement of the Australian people for a better future. One of the things I want you to notice about this statement is this statement, there is no angry words. There are no threats. There are no demands. There's no hint of revenge and violence. There is simply an invitation. An invitation to the rest of Australia to take a walk, go walkabout with us as we unpack our history and rebuild our future. As we do decoloniality, as we de-link from the colonial overlays and re-exist what was here before. It's a powerful, powerful document. It is, as I would call it, a document of absurd compassion. That the people who were decimated by those who came here now reach out and invite them to partake in transformational forgiveness. Transformational forgiveness and redemption. Powerful. I could probably leave it there because that's a very powerful document and it speaks of a lot of important things. We're going to unpack it a little bit by bit by bit, and we're going to think about what some of the things are. That's what it says, and that's what I just said to you. It's an invitation, an act of absurd compassion and generosity from a people decimated and dispossessed to those who came here and continue to dispossess. It's an act of transformational forgiveness. But it has to be accepted. There has to be a yes to go with this process. We know from our own religious experiences that there are offers made to us to accept and to take in the power of those offers that come from God or from others or even from the communities in which we're in. We have to accept. The statement from the heart was designed or written after 12 months of consultation. 13 or so groups got together across Australia, 100-odd people at each group. They were invited to come and participate, elders and others, and they sat around and they talked about what was important to them. It was in response by the Referendum Council, in response to the ask by the government, that we find out how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would like to be recognised. We accepted that invitation and a group of people went and did those consultations. In those consultations, 4 things became very obvious. It wasn't to have recognition in the preamble to the Constitution, but it was to have a voice. And the 4 things are there in the order in which they were given. Voice, treaty, truth, and Makarrata. They're in that order because this is how, in traditional communities, we would do restorative justice. This is how we would resolve conflict and work towards wholeness. As you notice, it's in a circle. It was never designed to be a linear action. If you're in the bush, most Aboriginal languages don't have a word for straight line. Because if you're in the bush and you walk a straight line, what happens? You hit a tree, you hit a bush, you hit a rock, fall in the river. So you've got to go like that. So there's no straight line. Circles is how we understand our country. My country is everything I can see, horizon to horizon, sky to the countries, sky country to the countries below, and it's circular. And everywhere I move, that circle follows me. Never goes away. And I'm always responsible for country wherever I am, because I'm in the middle of it. But I also carry my own country with me. So there's this circular motion which is about wholeness, it's about strength, it's about inclusion, about healing. Circles are medicine. Things we do in circle heal. So we have this whole process of the circle, and there are circles or spheres around each of the other things. And it's about voice, treaty, truth, makarata. And in the centre is not reconciliation. In the centre is justice and wholeness. Putting right what was done wrong and bringing everyone together. I'm going to touch on each one of these. Voice is really important because if you're not heard, you're not seen. And if you're not seen, you don't exist. If you're not heard, you're not seen. If you're not seen, you don't exist. You're not there. So those that come here can go on madly doing their colonial thing for the rest of history if they don't hear us. They don't hear us. They don't hear our voice. You know about terra nullius? Bit of a fake idea, empty land. Well, there's a thing called persona nullius. Nobody there. You're not a person. You're not real. That's why everybody has an opinion about us, and that's why everybody has to say about us, and that's why everybody mediates our existence. Because in reality, we're not people. Persona nullius. So one of the things about the voice is this important process of putting our voice inside the birth certificate of this nation, the Constitution. Now, the Constitution, you probably have read as many times as you've read the Statement from the Heart. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But it is the birth certificate of the nation. And it is appropriate that those people here first are included in that document. And when we do that, what we do is we place our sovereignty, which we've never, and this is something to understand, nobody can ever take my sovereignty. It's in my body, runs through my veins. You can't take it away. You might take away my rights, but you can't take away my sovereignty. Because it's not a legal idea as seen by Western law-based philosophy. It's a spiritual notion. And I think for some of you in this room today would understand exactly what I'm talking about there. It's a very real practice. So we're putting that spiritual, relational, respectful sovereignty alongside the hard sovereignty of the law-based sovereignty of the Crown. And in a sense, when we do that, what we're doing is putting the two together. Probably more putting the heart back in Australia. We put the two side by side. They sit there and they talk to each other. There's a conversation between the two ideas which will fulfill this nation. Putting the relational, respectful, Aboriginal sovereignty alongside the hard, law-based sovereignty. Give something to each, and it becomes whole. So voice is important, because voice is about this. It's about recognition. Putting the voice, getting a yes on the voice and putting it in the Constitution means that we've recognised each other in this space. The second thing after that, and we often get told we need to do treaty first, I'll touch on that with some of the frequently asked questions later, but treaty, well, that's just an agreement. If I've suddenly realised and recognised that you are here, then I have to recognise that we have to get together and work out how to share this space. You can't do agreements with people who don't exist. Okay? If you continue to see Aboriginal people as deficit people who don't exist, you can't do treaties with them because they're not here. They're not equal. So once we've done the recognition and given Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people a voice, then you can have a treaty or agreement. We can say, well, look, I don't necessarily like this situation. I would prefer that you all got on a boat and went home. We've counted you, and we can't get you all on Christmas Island. Been thought about. We have to work together. And the treaty is the thing we do, the agreement we come up with about how we work together. Treaty is about us saying to each other, we hear each other, we know we exist, and now we can come together in a process that may lead to us at some stage becoming one. It's conciliation. And we've never done it in this place, in this country. We've never done it. It's not ever happened. So we have conciliation. Then once you know someone exists and you agree with them that you're going to be here, you have to tell the truth about what it feels like to be in this space. I can send you all the slides, so don't worry about taking them. We have to work out what it feels like to be in this place, what it feels like for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and what it feels like for those who came later. What it feels like for those whose 90% of the population of Aboriginal people who were here before died in the first 100, 110 years. Some people, it's somewhere between 70 and 90, depending on who counts, because there wasn't any census until 1967 that counted us. So we know that our people have been decimated. We know that in our lived experience, we have been dispossessed. So we have to find a way to address those issues. And we can't just sit and have Aboriginal people walk out into the room and take their clothes off and show the scars. What has to happen is that the non-Aboriginal people whose families were a part of the story work through their own colonial memory. Work through how they got the properties, how they got the privilege, how they got what they have now. And that applies not just to those who are part of the Anglo-Celtic heritage line, but it's everybody that came after. Because if you came here after, you benefit from the dispossession of Aboriginal people. You have the opportunity to buy property, because we don't have an opportunity to have any. You have an opportunity to live in a certain lifestyle, because our lifestyles have been dispossessed. So everybody in this country should be taking part in truth-telling. What does it feel like for me when I think about what happened? Oh, I wasn't there. I know that. But you benefit from what happened there. And the lady in my church who's 85, and we had an elder come across the other day, and she spent quite some time with him talking about the fact that she's still concerned about how her grandfather first got the property. He was the first European owner of it. What happened to the Aboriginal people? Where did they go? Did they go anywhere? I come from a space where 100% of local Aboriginal people were, to quote William Cox, who built the road over the Blue Mountains, exterminated by 1875 in 50 years. And that was a plan to do that. He said the only way to deal with this vermin is to exterminate it, and that includes women and children. And the interesting thing in that story is that there were only one massacre recorded, and that was 16 people. What did they do to the rest? Yeah. Poisoned flour, poisoned water, hunting parties, whole range of things. And the details don't bear repeating. So we all carry a colonial memory, and mixed up people like me, who's got a bit of Irish and a bit of English in him, you know, is at war inside. Because there's two stories here that I have to deal with. So we need to do this truth. And this truth is really important, because if we don't do that truth, what happens when we do that truth together and we hear each other's stories and we relate to that is that we actually start to find connections, places to connect, places to be one with. In other words, we have true reconciliation. A lot of the reconciliation you talk about today is simply assimilation version 2. You get excited when somebody in an Aboriginal community becomes a lawyer. You know, that's assimilation. That's not reconciliation. Okay? So we have this idea there of truth. So once we've know you're there, we agree that we have to get along, we tell the truth about how it feels, we get to Makarrata. Coming together after a dispute. Now, we've watched way too many Disney movies, haven't we? The last 3 or 4 frames, the two protagonists come together and they walk off smiling and singing, and the birds are twittering and the sun is all glorious, and they go off into the sunset to live happily ever after. We have that idea about Makarrata. That's not what it is. Some of the root word for Makarrata in Yolngu language means spear. Spear. The thing about doing conflict resolution in our communities would be, once you've gone through this process, sitting in a circle with the community and rethought through all of these things as part of how you resolve a conflict, at the end, somebody has to do reparation. Somebody has to change. And one of the things that we would use is a spear, and throw a spear into the side of the thigh. And a spear in the thigh is not a superficial wound. You don't catch as many kangaroos after that for a while, because you run as fast. So for some of you might know the story of Jacob at Peniel, the river. He's been a bit of a turkey. He's taken off with all the family heritage, went away. He's been away for 20-odd years. He's on his way back. He's a successful businessman. He's got all kinds of things going on. And he gets back to the river, and he gets there and he says, I don't know whether I want to go home. I don't think that bloke, my brother's going to like me if I come back. Well, there's probably a dozen or so good reasons why that would be the case. Maybe more. So he sends everybody on ahead of him and stays at the river. Overnight, he wrestles with a young man. Was that young man God, or was it Jacob's conscience? Was Jacob actually wrestling with himself? Whatever he was wrestling with, when he wakes up in the morning, two things have happened. He walks with a limp. He has a dislocated hip. And he has a new name, Israel, and a new purpose. That's the point of this for Australia. And remember that we as Australia will walk with a limp. Not as a negative, but as a positive. As a way of becoming a new nation with a new name, justice. Finally, we will be everything we think we are now, but we're not. That's where it'll come to. It's a process that goes in that circular measure process, and it doesn't happen by Tuesday next week. As our Canadian Indian friends would say, this is a 7th generation transformational process. What you're doing when you vote yes is voting for the generations ahead of you. Because it's going to take some time for the voice and its things to kick in and make the changes it's capable of making. And you and I mightn't be here to see them in their fullness. But if we do the right thing at this stage, we're working towards the betterment for our grandchildren's children. And that's what it should be about. When do we finish, Mr. Phillip? When do we finish? Oh, okay. Settle in then. Get comfortable. Could take a while. What is the referendum? It's not the voice. The voice is the instrument of the constitutional recognition. It is about how do we recognise the First Nations people in the Constitution. It is that we will fill in those elements we talked about before over time from the statement. And it's built on decades of recognition, work for recognition. It goes back to the 1900s when Uncle King Billy walked from Gundagai to the opening of Parliament, stood in front of the Duke in his dirty old clothes and his little flag and said, "Don't forget our people." Goes back to William Cooper and team in 1938. This is not something that's just happened. In the modern times, it's from 1990, the 1990s. Hawke, Howard, Keating, all those illustrious people, all had a goal to bring recognition for Aboriginal people in the Constitution. They had different ideas. Some of them I think are good and some I think are a bit dodgy, but they all had ideas about how it should be done. So if we're talking 7 generations, we're 3 generations into this process. Okay? We've got 4 generations to get through the rest of that circle. So it's a 40-year process. We'll be looking down at it. But that's what it's about. This is what's just been released and what will go to the Parliament. And it's about a very simple situation that there'll be a clause in the Constitution, 129, and in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders section, and there'll be a body called a voice. It will make representations to Parliament and to the Executive on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And the Parliament will organise how it operates, do the legislation, because that's what we pay them to do. We don't pay them to stand there yelling at each other. We actually pay them to come up with the legislation and the processes and the structures, actually to govern. You know, might be a new thing for some of them, but that's what we ask them to do, to try and get that process through. It's really quite simple. I'll come back to some of that with some more of the questions. This is the draft referendum question. Again, very simple. Do you think Australia is mature enough to put Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution and give them a voice? That's basically what it's asking. Are you mature enough to say yes to that? Or does that threaten you, that challenge you? Does that challenge Australia? It's a very simple question. It's like when you go up to somebody for a first date. When you go, would you come out with me? And you have two answers to give. Yes or no. Yes or no. You either go, yes, I'd love to go out with you, or no, go away. Not interested. Yes or no. And that's the question here. Very simple question. And I want to tell you something. It's not a legal question. It's not a constitutional question. It's not a political question. It's a ethical, moral and spiritual question. It asks you to turn off your little brain and turn on your big brain. Aboriginal people say we have two brains. Little brain, that's the one in your head, the rational one that makes up all the stories. Gets you out of trouble when you sort of have to. It's the one that often gets you into trouble in the first place. That's the one up here. And then you have your big brain. And I'm very blessed. I have a big brain. That's your gut. That's the thing that keeps you alive. That's your gut reaction. That's when you feel it and you go, hang on, this is not right. It's here. It's just sensing, you're feeling. It's the bit that connects to what's happening around you. What we're asking you to do in this is to disconnect the little brain, reconnect this and say, does it feel right to say yes? Does it feel right to recognise? And this is no different question than this one, which was in 1967, the much talked about, how successful that was. That was the question. What we have to remember in 1967, though, maybe that's in 1967 there was no case. There was one question, one slogan. Everybody was saying yes in the parliament. Not quite the same today. The voice is what we asked for. It's what we asked for. I'm always interested when I read people talking about, well, you know, the voice, it should be like this. Well, really, it's not up to you. It's what we asked for. And this is asking you to respond. Not to give an opinion, not to make a statement that says, I think we could have done it better ourselves. No, you couldn't have. Well, I'll tell you why, because you're not Aboriginal. You weren't asked. It was ours to fix this, so we gave you a response. The permanent advisory body in Parliament, in the speaking to Parliament that is enshrined in the Constitution. Very important. We've had so many bodies that have come and gone because political parties change their mind. Fairly simple. Consist only of First Peoples representatives, which we vote for at both levels. There's two levels in this. There'll be the local level and there'll be the national level. Probably 24 at that level. Smaller groups at local level, but they will deal with local issues, shoot it up to the bigger one, and those questions will be answered on policy at the top. And that works because I'm a part of the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Anglican Commission. We have 63 members. They come from right across Australia. States with more Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people have more representatives. So we get to get that balance. We've been doing it for 31 years and it works pretty well for us. Can't block legislation, can't deliver services, and we don't get our hands on any money. Okay? We can't get our hands into the trough. We don't handle money. I think I've covered a little bit of that, but it just means that the changing political ideologies that go into government can't get rid of this. We know that it's going to go like that, up and down. There'll be times when it'll work really well and the times when it won't work as well. But let me just say that if you're somebody, if we get this through for 65% or 70% of Australians voting for it, if you're a political party and you decided you're not going to take any notice to them, the next election might show you that the people who gave you a job to do don't think you're doing a very good job. It gives you power to make them behave. What will it achieve? It's an important step in talking about the things that happened in the past and looking at what goes on and on and on. And we saw a little example of that last night with Auntie Joy suddenly finding she was too difficult to handle and they wouldn't have her at an event. That's the impacts of colonisation. Auntie Joy asked for a couple of things, and somebody who is culturally inept, they said, that's just too hard. We won't have you, we'll get somebody else. That's colonisation, and that is continuing. I hear it all the time. I see it everywhere I go, where people will say, and I was talking to a reporter and they wanted me to do a story. I wanted them to do something for me, to do a story to help promote what I'm doing. And they said, oh, no, we won't do that. We don't do that. We'll do this. I said, no, that's not what I want. Okay? This is what we need. This is how we're going. No. I'm trying to help you. You listen to me? I'm trying to help you. And you're being very difficult. And I'm going, but what you're going to do is not what we need. I'm a professional and I know what I'm doing. And I'm going, yeah. I felt like saying I'm a blackfella and I know what I'm doing too. But I didn't say that. But we get that all the time, you know. And what happened to Auntie Joy is not good. Not good. What will happen is that we finally will get a voice inside where our voice sits alongside the modern voice and moderates the modern voice. Just think about it. If we'd have had that voice in the beginning, would we have had the damage to the environment that we have now? We would have had some, but there would have been voices speaking against it. In Queensland, which is beginning a treaty process, we just had a Queensland boy spend 45 days at the age of 13 in solitary confinement, 22 in secession. Colonisation is still going on, it hasn't finished. Do we need more detail? No. How do I say that any louder? No, we don't need more detail. What we're talking about is putting heads of power in the Constitution. We are setting up the process so those who are asking for more detail can actually do the detail. Parliament. Okay? They will design the detail that makes this thing work. There'll be guidelines, there'll be parameters, and I've been asked by both sides to provide some guidelines and parameters about how it might look. But it's their detail. Their detail. Because what happens in heads of powers are enacted in legislation and tested in the High Court. People are going, whoa, we're going to block up the High Court. Well, look, really? That's how we do everything in legislation. We make a law. People who the law affects says, I don't like that. Let's see if they have the right to make that law. And they test it in the High Court. High Court judges go, great, I've got some work to do. Because that's what they're paid to do. And they don't decide on detail, they decide on whether the government has the right to make that decision. So, tax laws. Nobody's affected by tax law. Who is it? You all live in a tax-free zone? Yeah. In the original Constitution, there were 39 elements under Section 51, all clauses for things the Commonwealth could do. On tax, has anybody seen the tax law in book form lately? And rising. In the Constitution, it simply says taxation, but so as not to discriminate between states or parts of states. That's all that's in the Constitution, and they've made it that high. Because they've made legislation and we've tested it in the High Court. I told you before about sovereignty. We won't go over that again. We hear a lot about will it divide by race? I'm afraid that ship floated a long time ago. Australia was built on race. It is very unedifying to read the speeches of the politicians preparing for federation because they're all about Australia as a white supremacy project. They're all about that. They're all about race. The Constitution was written, dare I say it publicly, by people who were racist. This is divided. It took us until 1962 to get the vote, until 1967 to be counted in the Constitution. So race has been the basis of Australian politics, life and practice. And we can tell many different stories about that. But we have to understand that. So we're not dividing it, we're actually bringing it together. We're actually putting it back together the way it should have been in the beginning. Persona nullius, white possession. Western Europeans and the people affected by that culture love to possess things. In possessing Australia, they possess the people. And in possessing the people, they mediate their lives. We might not go too much further. Treaty first, I think I said that to you. What about immigrants? White Australia policy has been lifted. People who come here from other countries have the opportunity to share in what was already here. That's not us. Even though, technically speaking, I am from another country. People often say to me, why don't you have more Aboriginals in Parliament? And I said, I'm a bit concerned about that because under what was the Section 42 they were talking about? Dual citizens. I've never ceded my Wiradjuri citizenship. So I can't really go into Parliament because I'm a dual citizen. Think about that. I'm a Wiradjuri, sovereign, embedded at birth, Australian for the purposes of management and control. Okay? Do all First People support the voice? Do everybody here support Mr. Albanese? Don't make yourself conspicuous, but I'm sure not everybody voted for him. Okay? You support him, but what I'm trying to say at the election, not everybody supported him. So you blokes can't agree on everything. Why do you think we should agree on it? And what you have to understand about the First People and supporting the voice is much of it is because of colonial overlay. Because over the years, and the way that we've managed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is that we've set them up with crumbs from under the table, and we force them to be in competition to each other. We give them proprietary rights over the small piece of land called their country, and we have people in conflict. We also took away their children. Okay, we also keep taking away their children at greater rates now than before. We still keep leaving them in communities without the basic resources, etc. So Aboriginal people don't necessarily all support the voice. Bottom is too much saying sorry and no change. We've been saying sorry and yet we go and treat Auntie Joy the way we do. It just doesn't sort of fit, does it? This is the bit we need to deal with before we just have some questions. No cases. Here's some no cases that you hear a lot about. Jacinta Price and the Conservative no. Jacinta still thinks in a neo-conservative manner, which says that we're all one, we all belong together, we've never been divided, and she wishes to resolve the issues on the ground. Unfortunately, those issues that are on the ground has had buckets of money thrown at it, hasn't resolved it. You cannot fix a problem with the same methods that created the problem. Okay? So we have this very conservative no. Notice up the top I've said Yinyamara Yumbawan, which means respect everything. You won't hear me giving these people a serve. They're entitled to their opinion. I don't agree with it, but they're entitled to it. And they come from out of their own particular lived experiences, and that's okay too. Just that I think they're missing some important bits. But I won't stand here and say anything to discredit them as people. Lydia Thorpe and the Progressive No. Lydia really is talking out of the philosophy that comes from Michael Mansell out of South Tasmania and the kind of people that came with him at the time, Gary Foley and co. Michael Mansell has a very, very good book, and he talks about what he would like to see happen. He wrote it in 2016, before The Voice, and he's talking about a totally different concept, which in a perfect world would be okay. But because of the kind of politics that we're engaged in, it's not going to get a Guernsey. So we have to begin where we can. But that's Lydia's point. She doesn't always say it very well. She doesn't always demonstrate it very well. But that's what she's trying to get to. Okay? The National Party and blood content. How much Aboriginal are you? I get that a lot, you know. Which part of you is Aboriginal? And I look at them and go, well, I can show you if you like. That's naughty, isn't it? I have to come to a confession. The other thing about it, that is, when people say that to me, I go, have you ever done your ancestry DNA? Who's done that? Okay. How much Australian are you? None. Because there's no genome code for DNA for Australians. You all come from somewhere else. And you were born here, and because you're born here, you identify as an Australian. Because you were born here. You self-identify. as Australians. And the tax department's really pleased about that, because they had to rely on the 3% of Australia that are real. They wouldn't have enough money to build anything. I find that really amusing. And it doesn't mean that you're not an Australian in any sense. It just means that we have to get over this kind of white blindness to some of these kind of issues. Okay? So whatever part of me is Aboriginal means I'm more Australian than anybody else anyway. Okay? So but that's the kind of idea to sort of split us up and say, and you know, can I be on The Voice because I'm not really dark? Well, my brother got the colour and I got the culture. He does the colour and I do the culture, okay? We're a good pair. He's got the nose, he's got everything. Even his son is darker and more obviously Aboriginal than me, and he's lived in England for all of his life. Crazy, isn't it? But that's what it is. Then we have the liberal in the detail. I talked about that before. Western mindset, the little brain says, I must know where this is going to end, and I must know everything that's going to happen, and I must have contingency plans for everything, and I can't go and do anything until I know absolutely everything about it. Anybody in here got married? Did you know all the detail before you did? No, you didn't. You learned it on the job. You made decisions on the job that makes it work, don't you? Absolutely. So that's my answer there. Okay, if I get Peter into a room, I'm going to say to him, did you know all the detail before you married your wife? The answer is no. And that's the same thing here. I talked about mob, and it's really this fact that we're so deeply affected by the colonial impact that we struggle with this. We don't really trust governments. We don't really trust white people. Some of us are getting used to them, but sorry, bad joke. And then we got the yes buts. Yeah, they go, yes, yeah, I'm for the referendum. Yes, but. And then you get these things. But I don't think I agree with everything, and I don't think I agree with this, but I think we could do it this way. You get the Frank Brennans and the others of the world who are constantly sort of riding that process where they're trying to include everybody and actually include nobody. So you see, it's about the voice. And you have to listen to us. You have to hear what we're saying about this whole process. And you have to resist the urge to have an opinion. You have to resist the urge to say, as I was told yesterday by a person in a group that I don't know, yesterday, the day before, I did a seminar for, and she said, have you ever lived in a community, Aboriginal community? I said, nope, haven't. And then she said, oh, I've lived in a community for 10 years. Not Indigenous person. The insinuation in all of that was, I don't know what I'm talking about, because she's lived in a community for 7 years. The difference is she lived in a community. I lived the experience for 68 years. You can have opinions about it, and they're your opinions, and you're allowed to have them. But like haircuts, not all of them are good. You can have opinions about it, but just remember what you're having opinions about is our lived experience. Okay? It is our lived experience, and if we are playing poker, the latter trumps the former. Okay? Now, I'm happy to answer questions. And you can ask anything. Yes, at the back there. Look, the override of it is that in the initial stages it'll be about things that particularly affect Aboriginal people. We haven't told them that.
That's part of the marriage part.
Yeah, that's the part of the marriage part. You know, you see, when I got married, I never realised there were so many things I didn't know. I'm learning. I haven't got them yet. No, what you're saying is, it's initially about those things that specifically address Aboriginal issues. But there will be things like water management that we will want to have a say on, because water is a cultural item, not just a pragmatic item for us. So we'll need to have some say about how water's used or where it's used. And for example, the issues we're facing in Wilkenya and Menindee at the moment with the second fish kill since 2019. So there's issues with water and it affects Aboriginal communities, and therefore that needs to be addressed. So I will think that the voice, as it begins this process, will be selective in how it does those things and the things that it's been asked to act on, because a lot of those things will be done on also on a lower level in the community groups. So the community groups, the regional groups will resolve the issues here. Up here we'll talk about the big picture stuff, the overall policy over the whole of Australia. Does that help? But don't be fearful of it. I think we get ourselves in and we go, what if? You know?
Coming back to that, if it is on a whole lot of issues,
and that's why it's important they talk to executive government. As the executive government begins to do legislation, and we're able to have a whisper in their ear about, when you're doing that, can you think of this? Can you include that? What about this? Instead of getting it into Parliament, and then it has to go back and be re-looked because Parliament says, yeah, they got a point. Yeah, they got a point, we should do that. Then it's got to go back and do the whole thing again. That's why talking into executive government means that we get ahead of that kind of roadblock, okay? And remember, there's only 24 people there. They're not going to have the superpowers to handle everything, okay? Yes?
You even described this voice treaty.
Yeah.
Is there a concern from this group? It's a shame we've sort of stopped the most but is there a concern that this is a thin wedge? Voice, but the next it is a continuum. The next one is treaty, which some people may read as negotiation, and then by definition.
Can I tell you something? Has your house got 2 stories? Oh, good. I'll take yours, because I don't like houses with upstairs bits. This kind of fear that we're actually going to be able to take things from people is irrational. It doesn't exist. Marbo and the others made sure that that wasn't the case. And individuals can't do that. I don't know how else you can communicate it better than what it has been over the ages. We can't take anything from you. It's not about taking things. It's about, and that's why this process works through with the treaty, and that is that as you work through, we develop relationships. As we develop relationships and we hear ourselves better, we get to a stage where we say, together, well, maybe that's a good idea. And it doesn't become a demand and it doesn't become a threat. Okay? The problem Australia has is if you steal something from somebody, you're always fearful someone's going to take it off you. And that's underlying this kind of mentality that you're talking about.
My concern is more how we get that message across. That it is, we shouldn't jump.
Yeah. We need to get away from having combative conversations on Q&A. We need to get away from that whole this, that. We need to get to a stage where people are listening to rational people like me. There's a few more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, hang on. So we have to get more rational people like me to be able to say to you, look, this is not what it's about. This is about a process of coming together as one over a period of time, and we're not trying to take anything. Okay?
Question as regards to the voice, 24th.
Yeah.
There are 350.
Yeah. Yep.
Will 350 be?
Yeah. What?
How will the 350 different groups be able to come to an agreement?
Well,
Be
I mean,
able to communicate?
originally there was 350 or 300 different language groups. We don't have those now because some of them, like mine and like the Kalara in Sydney, and that have been wiped out. So there's less. But the issue with that is that it's going to be, because it's going to be on a regional basis, there are smaller groups and they'll vote for their own representatives. Okay? And then the representatives at the top will be voted for as well, independently of those lower groups. And in that membership there'll be a fixed term, so you can't go more than 4 to 6 years or something along that line, so you can't stay there forever and be in the gravy train for a long time. You're going to be there, and you can, while you're working for long-term goals, you're going to have to move out and others come in. It's going to have some interesting conversations in Aboriginal communities. Many of you don't belong to an Aboriginal community in groups, but, you know, just imagine your extended family all getting together and just decide on one major thing. How's that work for you?
Yes, we Jews are very good at that.
Yeah, you blokes know that, don't you?
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
I think that you've been talking for about an hour and a quarter now, which is
I've only
amazing,
just
and I
started.
know that you could go on forever.
What I want to say, though, is before we do this, this is important, because the Torres Strait Islanders have their own statement, called the Massig Statement. While it is fully in support of the statement from the heart, there are 4 underlying principles that sit there about having their own self-determination, being able to do their own political and economic stuff, about self-government, and about being able to build relationships inside that. We're in an interesting time with that in terms of the Anglican Church, because the Anglican Church in North Queensland is setting up Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander councils, which will be autonomous, connected to, but not of. And they will have, so they're taking this model already into the process. And it just reminds us that this country, we're not the same. We might all look as intelligent and good looking as me, but we're not the same. Don't look so bewildered. Yeah, that's it. If you want more information, I'll hand out in a minute these little cards with a QR code on it. Hook on the QR code, and there are pages and pages of information on that website that will be useful for you. Videos of me and other things, okay? PowerPoint presentations, documents, etc. I did some theological reflections, but it's on the Second Testament, not the First.
The which? Now you know why Glenn's my favourite Aboriginal clergyman. That was absolutely amazing, and I call on Maureen Barton, the Vice President of Progressive Judaism Victoria, to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Glenn. It's wonderful to listen to you speak again. And I think the thing that we can all take from this, or at least I'm going to take from this, is a beautiful circle that you described, how we first have a voice for recognition, and then a treaty for conciliation. Then there's truth, and without truth, what have we got? And I think if all communities could function in that space and then come to Makarrata. What a beautiful, beautiful world we would all live in. So thanks for sharing that, and I hope that we can, all of us, take that some way into our own lives. I'd like to present you with a beautiful gift. This is a book of the artwork of Victor Majner, who is, you know his name, and who is a member of this community and has painted amazingly beautiful paintings of the Torah. And hold on. That's for you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say that it was a real privilege, a huge privilege, to present this to you on behalf of both the Jewish community and the Council of Christians and Jews and everybody here. And you spoke at one of our art sessions, and Victor also did too. So you're both in very good company.
Wow,
Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on. We'll just get a little photo opportunity holding that, because I hope that Victor is watching. Victor was here just earlier but couldn't stay, unfortunately. But the art program that PJV was running, Art and Religion, Glenn was our first speaker, and it was an amazing couple of hours, absolutely amazing. Glenn, thank you. If any of you are interested, tomorrow, Leslie Sachs, who's in the front row here, will be talking at the Leo Beck Centre on behalf of the Council of Christians and Jews and PJV on minorities in Israel, women and minorities in Israel, at 11 o'clock. The Leo Beck Centre is 35 Hart Road, Kew. Thank you for coming. I hope that we've got 40 ambassadors for the yes vote. This was recorded and will be on YouTube, and we will be publishing that very, very soon. A lot of food for thought. Thank you very much.
Can I?
Oh, you've got me.
Can I just say, in Aboriginal pedagogy, if you come along to something like this and you learn something, it is your responsibility to pass it on.
Absolutely.
It is your responsibility in our culture that if you learn something, you don't hold it for yourself. There is no I in mob. There's an O which says others. So when you learn something, share it. Tell others. I really appreciate you having me, and I'll cherish this. And thank you, good friend and brother.
Take care.
You too. Thank you. Wow.